The ballroom fell silent when she entered. Not because of her beauty, though she possessed a quiet, haunting elegance that made men forget their words. Not because of her simple black dress among designer gowns. The silence came because everyone knew what she was. The cursed daughter of Via Garibaldi, born from two homeless souls lost to madness. Conceived, they whispered, on rain-soaked cobblestones while her parents screamed at shadows. She had no business being here. Yet she walked toward the one person no guest dared approach, Isabella Vercelli, the deaf daughter of the most dangerous man in Sicily. Across the room, Matteo Vercelli set down his wine glass. His dark eyes narrowed. The sigil tattoo on his wrist seemed to pulse as his fingers curled slowly around nothing. He had not felt curiosity in 15 years. Tonight it returned. And with it, something far more dangerous. Please like, share, and subscribe. The Ghost's Domain. Palermo existed in layers. The tourists saw sunlight on Baroque churches. They photographed fishing boats and tasted arancini from street vendors. They posted images of paradise. They never saw the second city, the one that breathed beneath. Matteo Vercelli ruled that city from a villa carved into the Sicilian hills. 300 years of blood had soaked its foundation. His grandfather had killed his own brother in the eastern courtyard. His father had buried rivals beneath the olive grove. And Matteo had burned it all down at 29. Now, at 47, he had rebuilt. Different. Cleaner. More absolute. He stood on the terrace of Villa Vercelli as twilight painted the Mediterranean gold. His suit was charcoal, hand-tailored in Milan. His silver-streaked dark hair was swept back from a face that revealed nothing. The sigil tattoo on his neck, an ancient serpent devouring a crown, caught the dying light. Il Fantasma. The ghost. They called him this because men who moved against him simply vanished. No bodies. No investigations. No whispered rumors of violence. Just absence. Below the terrace, preparations continued for tonight's charity gala. His legitimate businesses required these performances: art foundations, hospital donations, cultural preservation. The mask of a benefactor. He wore it well. Don Vercelli. Matteo did not turn. He recognized the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, loyal beyond question. Marco. His consigliere approached, tablet in hand. Marco Ferrante had served the Vercelli family for 31 years. He had survived the purge that killed Matteo's father. He had survived because he had helped orchestrate it. The Calabrian delegation confirmed attendance, Marco reported. Ricci himself will be present. He wants the shipping routes. He wants everything, Don Vercelli. He believes your refusal to expand into narcotics makes you weak. Matteo's lips curved. Not quite a smile. Let him believe. Marco hesitated. There's another matter. Now Matteo turned. Marco rarely hesitated. Isabella's new music instructor resigned this morning. Silence. That is the 4th instructor in 7 months. She claims Isabella threw a music stand at her. Matteo's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. My daughter does not throw objects. No, Don Vercelli. She does not. Marco's voice softened. But she also refuses to communicate with anyone we hire. The isolation is protective, damaging. The word hung between them. Matteo returned his gaze to the sea. His daughter had been deaf since birth, a genetic condition from her mother's bloodline. Elena had blamed herself. Then she had blamed him. Then she had taken a lover and tried to steal Isabella to Rome. She had not succeeded. Matteo did not speak of what happened afterward. But Elena's family no longer opposed him. Isabella will attend tonight's gala, he said finally. Marco's surprise was carefully concealed. She has not attended a public function in 3 years. She is 23 years old. She will learn to endure these obligations. Don Vercelli, the guests, will treat my daughter with absolute respect. Matteo's voice dropped to something softer, deadlier. Or they will learn why my enemies prefer death to my attention. Marco nodded slowly. I will prepare her security detail. Have her ready by 8. Later that evening, the Palazzo Ferrara had witnessed centuries of Sicilian power. merchants, nobles, invaders. They had all passed through its gilded halls. Now it hosted the Vercelli Foundation's annual arts benefit. 400 guests filled the ballroom. Politicians who owed their positions to Matteo's influence, businessmen who prospered under his protection, artists whose careers he had quietly funded. None approached him directly. They orbited instead, waiting for a glance, a nod, permission to exist in his proximity. Matteo stood near the north windows, a glass of Nero d'Avola untouched in his hand. His presence created a subtle vacuum, a space no one dared occupy. Beside him, equally isolated, stood Isabella. His daughter wore midnight blue silk that complemented her dark hair. She had her mother's delicate features, but her father's eyes, nearly black, revealing nothing. She watched the crowd with visible disdain. "This is pointless," she signed sharply. Matteo's hands moved in response, fluid, precise. He had learned sign language the week after her diagnosis. He had been 17 years old. Patience is never pointless. Patience for what? These people fear me. They should. They don't fear me. They fear you. He could not argue this. Isabella's gaze swept the room with the assessment of someone who had learned young that beauty attracted predators. Several young men had attempted to approach her already. Marco had redirected them. "I want to leave," Isabella signed. 2 hours. 2 hours. Then we discuss your new instructor. Her expression darkened. "I don't need an instructor." Music was Mother's obsession, not mine. The word mother created no visible reaction on Matteo's face. He had trained himself thoroughly. "You have talent. It should be developed." "I have a prison," Isabella signed. "It should be escaped." Before Matteo could respond, a murmur rippled through the crowd. He tracked the disturbance instantly, survival instincts honed by decades of violence. His hand shifted almost imperceptibly toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. But there was no threat, only a woman. She stood in the ballroom entrance, clearly uncertain. Her dress was simple black, modest, unfashionable, likely secondhand. Her dark hair was pinned up carelessly, strands already escaping. She held a violin case. "Who authorized her entrance?" Marco's voice came through the concealed earpiece. Matteo did not respond. He was watching. The woman, girl, really, she could not be more than 22, scanned the crowd with obvious discomfort. Her shoulders were tense. Her free hand fidgeted with her clutch. But her eyes moved across the assembled power brokers with something that looked remarkably like disinterest. As if their wealth and influence meant nothing. As if she were searching for something else entirely. "Don Vercelli?" Marco prompted. Around him, Matteo noticed the whispers beginning. Guests recognizing her. Drawing back. He caught fragments. Garibaldi's daughter. The mad ones. Born on the street like an animal. The woman heard them too. He saw her spine stiffen. Her chin lift. She did not retreat. "Marco," Matteo said quietly. "Who is she?" A pause. The sound of rapid typing. "Lucia Belladonna, 22. Violinist, apparently hired as a last-minute replacement for the evening's quartet. One of the musicians suffered a medical emergency." "And her background?" Another pause. "Longer. She was born on Via Garibaldi. Parents were homeless, documented as severely mentally ill. They died when she was 7, exposure, apparently. She was raised in church orphanages. Currently works at a bookshop near the university. No criminal record. No connections. No connections. No protection. She plays violin? Conservatory training, partial scholarship. She withdrew 2 years ago. Financial reasons, according to records." The crowd had parted around her now. A quarantine of whispered judgment. She stood alone in a circle of empty marble floor. But instead of fleeing, she was looking directly at Isabella. Matteo's instincts flared. His daughter had noticed the isolation too. Isabella watched the stranger with an expression Matteo had not seen in years. Curiosity. Before he could intervene, before Marco could redirect, Lucia Belladonna walked straight toward them. Not toward him, toward his daughter. The confrontation that changed everything. The crowd's murmurs rose to shocked whispers as Lucia crossed the invisible boundary that protected the Vercelli family. 2 security guards moved to intercept. Matteo raised one finger. They stopped. He wanted to see what would happen. Lucia stopped 3 feet from Isabella. Close enough to be dangerous. Far enough to not crowd. She set down her violin case. And her hands began to move. Hello. I'm Lucia. I noticed you're the only person here worth meeting. Italian Sign Language. Fluid. Natural. As if she had spoken it her entire life. Isabella's shock was visible. For a moment, Matteo's carefully controlled daughter simply stared. Then her hands responded. How do you know ISL? I learned at the orphanage. Many children there had hearing differences. Why would you approach me? Don't you know who my father is? Lucia's gaze flicked briefly to Matteo. He felt the weight of her assessment, the complete absence of fear. Then she looked back at Isabella. I know exactly who your father is. But you are not your father. You're the only person in this room who looks as uncomfortable as I feel. Isabella's lips twitched. Almost a smile. Matteo had not seen his daughter almost smile in over a year. They're all whispering about you, Isabella sighed. Yes. They always do. Does it bother you? Lucia considered. It used to. Now I find it useful. People who fear madness reveal their own weaknesses. That's surprisingly wise for someone who just crashed a Mafia gala. I didn't crash. I was hired to play violin. But the quartet refused to perform with me once they learned my background. So now I'm unemployed again and surrounded by people who think poverty is contagious. Isabella actually laughed. The sound was slightly off. She could not hear herself, but it was genuine. Surprised. Delighted. Matteo felt something shift in his chest. Something dangerous. What will you do now? Isabella asked. Wait until someone throws me out, I suppose. Unless you'd like to hear me play first. I'm deaf. I know. But music isn't just sound. It's vibration, emotion, movement. Lucia gestured toward a piano in the corner, a Steinway that had been intended for the quartet's accompaniment. If you place your hands on the wood while I play, you'll feel what I feel. Isabella's eyes widened. No one had ever offered to share music with her that way. The instructors her father hired had always focused on technical training, sight reading, proper form. None had considered that Isabella might want to experience music for its own sake. You would do that? For someone you just met? Why not? The worst that can happen is security shoots me. My father doesn't shoot women. Lucia's smile was small but genuine. That's reassuring. She picked up her violin case and walked toward the piano without waiting for permission. Isabella looked at her father. Matteo had not moved. His expression remained unreadable. But Isabella had spent her entire life studying his micro-expressions, learning to read the man everyone else found impenetrable. She saw something new there, something that almost looked like interest. May I? She signed. He should refuse. This woman was unknown, unvetted, potentially a threat despite her apparent poverty. Anyone could have sent her, Ricci, the Roman families, the dozen other enemies who waited for weakness. 2 songs, he signed back. Then Marco will escort her out. Isabella did not argue. She walked toward the piano, and for the first time since her mother's death 3 years ago, her steps had something like eagerness. Matteo watched, and realized he was in trouble. The music that pierced the ghost's armor. Lucia opened her violin case with practiced efficiency. The instrument inside was old. The varnish was worn in places, the strings slightly oxidized. But when she lifted it, her entire presence transformed. The nervous girl vanished. Someone else emerged. Isabella placed her palms flat against the piano's body, positioned to feel every vibration. The ballroom had grown quiet. 400 guests watched the unprecedented scene. Don Vercelli's isolated daughter communicating with the cursed offspring of Via Garibaldi's mad souls. Some were scandalized. Others were fascinated. Matteo observed them all, cataloging reactions for later analysis. But when Lucia raised her bow, his attention narrowed to her alone. She began with Massenet's meditation from Thais. The first notes were tentative, a question asked to an empty room. Then the melody strengthened, deepened, became something aching and honest. Lucia played with her eyes closed. Her body swayed slightly. The music seemed to emerge not from technique, but from somewhere wounded and beautiful inside her. At the piano, Isabella's expression shifted. She could not hear the notes, but she felt them, vibrations traveling through wood and air and bone. Her eyes grew bright. Her hands pressed harder against the instrument, greedy for more. When the piece ended, the silence was absolute. Then Isabella began to applaud. The sound was slightly mistimed. She could not hear the rhythm, but she did not care. She stood and clapped with genuine joy, and after a shocked moment, portions of the crowd joined her. Lucia's cheeks flushed. She was not accustomed to approval. That was beautiful, Isabella sighed when the applause faded. I felt every phrase. I'm glad. You should learn to play. You have musician's hands. I told you. Music was my mother's obsession. Then make it yours. Take it back, from her memory. Make it something new. Isabella stared at her. No one had ever framed it that way. Every instructor had treated her musical education as a continuation of Elena's wishes, a memorial to a woman Isabella had complicated feelings about. This stranger suggested something radical. Ownership. Across the room, Matteo noticed his daughter's expression change. The defensive hostility she wore like armor softened. Lucia had accomplished in 5 minutes what a dozen professionals had failed to achieve in 3 years. Don Vercelli. Marco's voice came through the earpiece. Do you want me to remove her now? Matteo's gaze remained fixed on the two women. No. No. Bring her to me. The moment of first contact, Marco approached Lucia with professional neutrality. Signorina Belladonna. Don Vercelli requests a word. Lucia's composure flickered. Not fear, Matteo noted that immediately. Something more like resignation. She had expected to be thrown out. Being summoned was somehow worse. Of course, she said quietly. Isabella grabbed her arm before she could follow Marco. The touch startled Lucia. She clearly was not accustomed to physical contact. Don't let him intimidate you. Isabella signed rapidly. He's terrifying, but he's not cruel. You love him. He's my father. He's the only person who never abandoned me. The words struck something deep. Lucia's expression softened. I understand, she signed. I had no one like that. Then she followed Marco across the ballroom, feeling 400 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Matteo watched her approach. She moved like someone accustomed to navigating hostile spaces, aware of exits, conscious of her body language, revealing nothing that could be used against her. Survival instincts. Learned young. She stopped 3 feet away. Professional distance. The same boundary she had maintained with Isabella. Don Vercelli, she said. Her voice was lower than he had expected. Musical, despite her nervousness. You play beautifully. The compliment clearly surprised her. Thank you. Where did you study? The Conservatorio di Palermo. For 2 years. Why did you leave? Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Financial circumstances. The church withdrew their support? She did not ask how he knew about her background. Everyone in the room knew. The church supported my education until I turned 18. After that, I worked. It wasn't enough to cover tuition and living expenses. You could have sought patronage. You have talent. Patrons require performances. Performances require networking. Networking requires. She paused, choosing words carefully. A background that doesn't frighten potential sponsors. You think your birth circumstances frighten people? I think my birth circumstances make people uncomfortable. They prefer their charity recipients properly grateful and carefully tragic. My tragedy is too chaotic. Too strange. Matteo felt his interest sharpen. She was intelligent, observant, unafraid to speak plainly despite knowing exactly who she addressed. My daughter laughed tonight, he said. She hasn't laughed in over a year. Lucia's expression softened slightly. She's remarkable. The fact that she survived her isolation with her spirit intact speaks to her strength. Or to her stubbornness. Same thing often. The corner of his mouth twitched. He was almost smiling. When was the last time anyone had almost made him smile? Isabella requires a music instructor, he said. The previous four have proven inadequate. Lucia's eyes widened. Are you offering me a position? I'm offering you an interview. Tomorrow. Villa Vercelli. 9 o'clock. Don Vercelli, I don't know if I'm qualified to. You made my daughter laugh. You communicated with her naturally. You offered to share music with her in a way that acknowledged her deafness as difference rather than deficit. He paused. You are more qualified than anyone we have previously employed. Lucia stared at him. She was searching his face for the trap, the hidden motive, the cruelty beneath the offer. She found nothing readable. Why would you trust me? You don't know me. My parents were. Your parents are irrelevant. The words stopped her cold. I don't judge potential assets by their origins, Matteo continued. I judge them by their usefulness. And their loyalty. I haven't demonstrated either. Not yet. The implication hung between them. Lucia understood suddenly that this was not simply a job offer. It was an invitation into his world, with all the danger that implied. What would this position require? Daily instruction for Isabella. Residence at the villa. Discretion regarding anything you observe within my household. Residence. My daughter's security requires controlled access. Anyone who works closely with her must be vetted and monitored. You mean imprisoned? I mean protected. His voice hardened slightly. Isabella is my only family. She is also my greatest vulnerability. Anyone who threatens her, intentionally or through negligence, will discover that my reputation for disappearing problems is not exaggerated. Lucia should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Relief. Because she understood him now. Beneath the power and the danger, Don Vercelli was simply a father who loved his daughter more than his own survival. She recognized that love. She had spent her entire life searching for it. I'll come tomorrow, she said. 9 o'clock. He nodded once. Marco will provide transportation. I can take the bus. Marco will provide transportation. It was not a suggestion. Lucia inclined her head slightly. Good night, Don Vercelli. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Signorina Belladonna. She looked back. His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps. Or warning. Thank you for giving my daughter joy tonight. It has been rare. Then he looked away, dismissing her, and Lucia walked out of the ballroom feeling like she had just stepped off a cliff, and discovering impossibly that she wanted to fall. The ghost's daughter. The next morning, the black car arrived at precisely 8:30. Lucia had been awake since dawn, second-guessing her decision in the thin morning light. Her tiny apartment above the bookshop offered no answers, only cracked plaster walls and a violin that had been her sole inheritance from parents she barely remembered. Marco stepped out of the car when she descended the narrow staircase. Signorina Belladonna. His tone was neutral. Don Vercelli appreciates punctuality. I'm ready. She was not ready. Nothing about her life had prepared her for what waited at Villa Vercelli. The drive took 40 minutes, through Palermo's chaos, then climbing into hills where the estates grew larger and the walls grew higher. Guards stood at checkpoints she hadn't known existed outside of war zones. Each checkpoint required verification. Each guard catalogued her face. By the time they reached the main gates of Villa Vercelli, Lucia understood something clearly. She was entering a fortress. And fortresses were not designed to keep threats out. They were designed to keep prisoners in. The tour of gilded cages. The villa was beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. Ancient stone walls covered in climbing roses. Courtyards with fountains that had witnessed executions. Gardens landscaped to hide security cameras and sightlines. Lucia observed everything. A servant led her through halls hung with Renaissance paintings, genuine, she suspected, not reproductions. Past libraries with books bound in leather older than her bloodline. Through sitting rooms that could swallow her entire apartment building. Finally, they reached the East Wing. Miss Isabella's quarters, the servant said. She will receive you in the music room. The music room occupied a corner of the villa, with windows facing the sea. Grand piano, harpsichord, cellos and violas in glass cases. a pipe organ built into the wall, and Isabella, sitting in a window seat, staring at Lucia with an expression caught between hope and suspicion. "You came," she signed when the servant departed. "I said I would." People say many things to my father. They rarely mean them. Lucia crossed the room slowly, giving Isabella time to adjust to her presence. "I don't say things I don't mean. It's inefficient." A small smile flickered across Isabella's face. "My father said something similar once. He said lying requires too much energy better spent on winning. He sounds exhausting." "He is. But he's also the only person in the world who sees me as a person rather than a vulnerability to exploit." Lucia sat in a chair near the window, close enough to sign comfortably, far enough to respect boundaries. "Tell me about your previous instructors. Why did they fail?" Isabella's expression hardened. "They treated me like a child. Or worse, like an inspiration." "Oh, the deaf girl plays piano. How courageous." Her signing grew sharp, angry. "I don't want to be inspiring. I want to be competent. I want to create music that matters, not music that gets praised because I manage it despite my limitations." "So you drove them away." "I tested them. They failed. And if I fail?" Isabella studied her for a long moment. "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you looked at me last night like I was interesting. Not tragic. Not inspirational. Just interesting." Lucia felt something warm bloom in her chest. Recognition. Connection. "You are interesting. More interesting than anyone else at that gala." "Including my father?" The question was loaded. Lucia sensed it immediately. "Your father is intimidating. That's different. But you're not intimidated by him." "I'm not intimidated by anyone." Lucia paused. "Fear is a luxury. I learned young that I couldn't afford it." Isabella leaned forward, intrigued. "Because of your parents? The stories people tell about them?" Lucia's hands hesitated. "You've heard the stories. Everyone has. Born on Via Garibaldi during a rainstorm. Parents screaming at visions. The mad couple who created a child and then forgot she existed. That's not entirely inaccurate, but not entirely true either. Truth is complicated when it comes to my origins." Lucia's signing slowed. "I remember my parents only in fragments. Smells. Sounds. The feeling of my mother's hand in mine before she forgot I was there. Before her madness took her. Before something took her. I've never been certain it was madness." Isabella's eyes widened. "What else would it be?" Lucia shook her head. "I don't know. But my mother had moments of clarity. In those moments, she would look at me with such focus, such desperation, and say, 'Remember the serpent, Lucia. The serpent that devours crowns.'" She did not notice Isabella stiffen. She did not see the girl's gaze dart to the family sigil visible on the villa's walls, a serpent devouring a crown. The Vercelli emblem. "What does that mean?" Isabella asked carefully. "The serpent that devours crowns?" "I never understood. By the time I was old enough to ask questions, both my parents were dead." Lucia's hands moved sadly. "The church said exposure killed them. Cold and neglect and their own broken minds. I was 7. "I'm sorry. Don't be." It was a long time ago. But Isabella was no longer focused on Lucia's grief. She was thinking about the serpent and wondering what her father would do when she told him. Later that day, the first lesson passed quickly. Lucia began not with technique but with communication, asking Isabella about music she had felt, vibrations she remembered, sensations she associated with sound. They discussed the physics of resonance, the mathematics of harmony, the emotional vocabulary of keys and tempo. Isabella listened with an intensity that surprised even her. "You're different," she signed when they finished. "All my other teachers started with scales. Scales are boring and useless without context." "What is the context? Why do you want to play music?" Lucia asked. "Not why your mother wanted you to play. Not why your father hires instructors. Why do you want to learn?" Isabella had never been asked this question. She sat in silence for a long moment, her hands still. "Because music is the one thing I can create that exists beyond my deafness," she finally signed. "When I play piano, I feel the vibrations travel through my body. I become the instrument. For those moments, I'm not Isabella, the deaf daughter of the ghost. I'm just me. Lucia smiled. That's a perfect answer. We start tomorrow.
Same time.
Isabella's relief was visible. You'll stay?
I'll stay.
My father will want to speak with you before you leave today. Lucia's smile faded slightly. I expected that. Don't let him scare you. I thought you said he wasn't cruel. He isn't. But he's very good at making people feel small. Don't let him. The ghost's study. Matteo's study occupied the heart of the villa. Dark wood paneling. A fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Windows overlooking the olive grove where, rumor claimed, 17 men lay buried. He sat behind a desk that had belonged to Napoleon's marshal. The sigil tattoo on his hand was prominent as he reviewed documents. Lucia entered when summoned. He did not look up immediately. Power games. She recognized them. She waited in silence, refusing to fidget. Finally, he set down his pen. Isabella tells me your first lesson was productive. Your daughter is brilliant. I don't say that lightly. I know. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. Sit. She sat. Marco conducted a thorough background investigation before this meeting. He found nothing of concern. There's nothing to find. I'm exactly what I appear to be. And what is that? A woman who survived circumstances that should have destroyed her and is now attempting to build a life despite the efforts of society to remind her daily of her origins. Matteo studied her. She met his gaze without wavering. Something flickered in his expression. Interest. Perhaps respect. You will live in the villa while employed. Your quarters will be in the East Wing, near Isabella's suite. You may use any facilities on the grounds except the West Wing and the lower levels. What's in the West Wing and lower levels? Business concerns you won't be involved with. Translation: crime. I understand. You will not invite guests without permission. You will not leave the grounds without escort. You will not discuss anything you observe here with anyone outside these walls. You're describing a prison. I'm describing protection. His voice hardened. My daughter has been targeted before.
Kidnapping attempts.
Blackmail schemes. Men who believed they could reach me through her. What happened to those men? They discovered that my nickname is not metaphorical. The ghost. Because he made people disappear. Lucia should have been horrified. Instead, she felt a strange comfort. A father who would destroy anyone who threatened his daughter was a father who understood love in its most primal form. She had never had anyone who loved her that way. I'll follow your rules, she said. Not because I fear you, because I understand why they exist. Matteo tilted his head slightly. Most people claim courage until they face consequences. I grew up on Via Garibaldi. I faced consequences before I could spell the word. And yet you survived.
Yes.
I survived. Something passed between them. Recognition again. Deeper this time. They were both survivors. Both forged in crucibles that should have broken them. One more condition, Matteo said quietly. You will not discuss my daughter's disability with anyone. The world does not need to know her challenges. Her deafness isn't a challenge. It's a difference. And I would never discuss Isabella with anyone who might use information against her.
Why?
You've known her less than a day. Lucia considered the question carefully. Because she looked at me last night without pity or disgust. Do you know how rare that is? For someone like me? She stood without being dismissed. I'll take excellent care of your daughter, Don Vercelli. Not because you're paying me. Because she deserves someone who sees her clearly. She turned to leave. Signorina Belladonna. She paused. You mentioned your mother spoke of serpents devouring crowns. Lucia went very still. Isabella told you. My daughter tells me everything.
He paused.
Do you know what that phrase means?
No.
It was the raving of a woman lost to madness. Perhaps. His voice revealed nothing. But in my experience, madness sometimes conceals truth rather than creating delusion. He returned to his documents. Welcome to Villa Vercelli. I suspect your presence here will prove interesting. Lucia left his study with the distinct impression that she had just entered a labyrinth. And somewhere in its depths, a monster waited. She simply wasn't certain yet whether that monster would devour her or save her. The woman in the walls. 2 weeks later, Lucia had been wrong about many things in her life. She had been wrong to trust the church officials who promised her education was an investment, not charity. She had been wrong to believe the quartet would judge her on her playing rather than her bloodline. She had been wrong to assume Villa Vercelli would feel like a prison. It felt, inexplicably, like home. Her quarters were modest by the villa's standards, merely 3 times larger than her old apartment. But they were warm, secure, filled with books someone had specifically chosen based on her reading history. That last detail should have disturbed her. Instead, it made her feel seen. Isabella's transformation. The change in Matteo's daughter became visible within days. Isabella began appearing at meals, something she had avoided for over a year. She started walking the gardens without her customary security escort hovering visibly. She laughed more frequently. And she played piano. Not the mechanical exercises her previous instructors had demanded, but actual music, pieces she chose herself, interpreted herself, felt through her entire body. Lucia watched this transformation with fierce satisfaction. "You're not healing her," she reminded herself. "You're just giving her permission to heal herself." But the truth was more complex. Isabella was becoming the sister Lucia had never had. And Lucia was becoming something dangerous. Necessary. The man in shadows. She noticed Matteo watching her. Not obviously, he was far too disciplined for that. But she caught glimpses. His figure at a window, when she walked the gardens. His presence in the library, when she browsed the philosophy section. His gaze across the dinner table, assessing, analyzing, cataloging. At first, she assumed he was monitoring her for threats. Then she began noticing other things. Fresh flowers appearing in her room. Rare varieties she had once mentioned loving in passing conversation with Isabella. Books she requested materializing on her shelves before she could order them. Her violin professionally maintained when she hadn't asked. Small gestures. Careful attention. The behavior of a man who was watching not for danger, but for something else entirely. The library confrontation. 3 weeks after her arrival, she finally addressed it directly. She found him in the library at midnight, his usual hour, she had discovered. He sat in a leather chair near the fire, whiskey in hand, reading a volume of Dante. The sigil tattoo on his neck caught the firelight. "You don't sleep," she said from the doorway. He looked up without surprise. He had known she was there, of course. The ghost was never truly unaware. "Neither do you." "I was reading. I came to find the next volume of the series." She held up a worn copy of Petrarch. 3rd shelf, left wall, 2nd row from top. She retrieved the book, but instead of leaving, she turned back to face him. "You're watching me? I watch everyone. Not like this." She moved closer. Dangerously close. "Marco watches me for threats. Your guards watch me for protocols. You watch me like you're trying to solve a puzzle." His expression remained impassive. "You are a puzzle. A woman of your background should be bitter, broken, desperate for escape or advancement. Instead, you seem genuinely content to spend your days teaching piano to a deaf girl and your nights reading poetry. Maybe I'm simple. Maybe I just want peace. No one who survived what you survived wants merely peace. They want justice. Or revenge. Or vindication. Maybe I've accepted that I'll never receive any of those things. Have you?" The question cut deeper than she expected. Because the truth was, she hadn't accepted anything. She had merely stopped hoping. There was a difference. "What do you want from me, Don Vercelli?" "Matteo." She blinked. "What?" "When we're alone, you may call me Matteo. The honorific becomes tiresome." "That seems inappropriate," says the woman who just invaded my library at midnight to confront me about my observation habits. "Fair point."
Fine.
"Matteo." The name felt strange on her tongue. Intimate. "What do you want from me?" He set down his whiskey, rose from his chair, moved toward her with the controlled grace of a predator who had no need to rush. She held her ground. He stopped less than a foot away, close enough that she could smell sandalwood and smoke, close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his dark hair. close enough that she could count the tiny scars along his jawline. Marks of violence survived. "I don't know yet," he said quietly. "And that disturbs me." "Why?" "Because I always know what I want. I have known since I was 17 years old.
Power. Control.
Protection of what's mine." His voice dropped lower. "But you've introduced a variable I didn't anticipate. And I find myself uncertain. Uncertainty isn't comfortable for you."
No.
"It is not." They stood in silence. The fire crackled. Outside, the Mediterranean whispered against distant shores. "I should go," Lucia said finally.
Yes.
"You should." Neither moved. "You're dangerous," she breathed. "Yes." "You could destroy me without effort." "Yes." "Then why do I feel safe here?" Mateo's jaw tightened. Because he knew the answer, even if she didn't. She felt safe because some part of her recognized that he would never harm her. That despite his capacity for violence, despite the empire of blood and shadow he commanded, she had become something he would protect rather than destroy. And that realization terrified him more than any enemy ever had. "Go to bed, Lucia." He stepped back, returned to his chair, picked up his whiskey with hands that did not quite remain steady. She went, but neither of them slept that night. The first claim. 1 month later, the gala was smaller than the Palazzo Ferrara event, a dinner party for 30 rather than 400. Politicians. Businessmen. 2 cardinal who pretended they didn't know how Matteo made his money. But for the first time, Lucia was not staff. She was a guest. The transformation. Isabella had insisted. "You've been locked in this villa for a month," she signed that afternoon. "You need to see people. Normal people." The 30 guests tonight include arms dealers and corrupt officials. That's not normal. Normal is relative. And father agreed. Lucia had been summoned to a room she didn't know existed, a dressing suite maintained by silent staff who seemed to anticipate her measurements before taking them. The gown they produced was midnight blue. Not black. That would be too expected for the cursed daughter of Via Garibaldi. Blue like deep water. Blue like bruises fading. Blue like the sky just before dawn breaks the darkness. It fit her perfectly. "How did they know my size?" she asked the servant who attended her. Don Vercelli is very observant. He had been watching her that closely, cataloging even the dimensions of her body. She should have been unsettled. Instead, she felt heat flush across her skin. The entrance. When she descended the main staircase that evening, conversation in the foyer paused. Lucia had spent her life being overlooked. The orphan. The mad couple's daughter. The girl everyone stepped around as if poverty might be catching. Now, dressed in silk that cost more than her annual earnings, hair arranged by professionals, jewelry borrowed from Isabella's collection, she was visible. Dangerously visible. Matteo stood near the base of the stairs. He wore black as always. The sigil tattoo on his wrist was visible beneath his cuff. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes. His eyes tracked her descent with an intensity that stopped her breath. When she reached him, he offered his hand. "You look..." He paused. "Different. Is that good or bad?" "It's dangerous. Everything about this house is dangerous." "Yes." His fingers closed around hers. "But you're beginning to match it." He guided her toward the dining room, and she was acutely aware of every point of contact between their hands. The rival's introduction. 30 guests meant 30 potential threats. Lucia quickly identified the most obvious one. Antonio Ricci was 42 years old, handsome in a flashy way that screamed new money, and clearly convinced that his Calabrian syndicate entitled him to challenge Vercelli dominance. He noticed Lucia immediately. Don Vercelli. He approached during the cocktail hour, eyes fixed on her rather than his host. "I don't believe I've been introduced to your lovely companion. Signorina Belladonna is my daughter's music instructor." "Music instructor?" Ricci's smile widened. "I had no idea instructors were invited to functions of this caliber. How progressive of you." The insult was subtle but clear. "She's beneath this gathering. And by extension, so is your judgment." Lucia felt Matteo stiffen beside her almost imperceptibly. Before he could respond, she spoke. Music has always transcended class boundaries, Don Ricci. Her voice was pleasant, controlled. Beethoven was born into nothing. Verdi's father was an innkeeper. Art requires talent, not pedigree. Ricci's smile tightened. And your talent, where was it developed? The Conservatorio di Palermo. Before that, the orphanages of Via Garibaldi. She held his gaze. I'm sure you've heard the stories about my parents. Everyone has. I have. Quite colorful. Madness often is. But then, sanity among power brokers is sometimes hard to distinguish from its opposite, isn't it? The implication was clear. Calling her parents mad while ignoring the documented violence of men like Ricci was hypocrisy at best. Ricci's expression flickered.
Surprise.
Then something colder. You have spirit, Signorina. I admire that. How fortunate for me. Matteo's hand found the small of her back. The touch was barely perceptible, fingers brushing fabric, nothing more. But Lucia felt it like a brand. Mine, that touch said. You will not threaten what is mine. If you'll excuse us, Matteo said smoothly. There are other guests to greet. He guided her away before Ricci could respond. The balcony confrontation. After dinner, Lucia escaped to a small balcony overlooking the olive grove. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to stop feeling Matteo's fingerprints burning through her dress. You handled Ricci well. She didn't startle. Somehow, she had known he would follow. He emerged from the shadows like his namesake, a ghost materializing from darkness. I've dealt with men like him before. They mistake cruelty for power. And what is power to you? The ability to protect what you love without becoming the thing you're protecting against. Matteo moved to stand beside her at the railing. The moon silvered the olive trees below. That's either very wise or very naive. Probably both. Silence stretched between them. You called me by my first name, he said quietly. Earlier, when we were speaking with Ricci. Lucia froze. She hadn't realized. I'm sorry. Don't be. His voice was strange, almost soft. I find I prefer it. She turned to look at him. In the moonlight, the harsh angles of his face seemed gentler. The silver in his hair caught the light. The sigil tattoo on his neck was barely visible, a shadow within shadows. You confuse me, she admitted. The feeling is mutual. Everyone says you're a monster. I am. Monsters don't send flowers to guest rooms. They don't remember offhand comments about favorite books. They don't. She stopped herself. Don't what? She shook her head. It doesn't matter. It matters. Fine. She faced him fully. Monsters don't look at someone like you look at me. Like I'm something valuable. Like I'm something worth protecting. Matteo went very still. You're reading things that aren't there. Am I? I'm your employer. Your staff. Any interest I've shown is professional. Professional. She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Is that what we're calling midnight confrontations in libraries? Professional? Lucia. Don't. She stepped back. Don't say my name like that if you're going to pretend there's nothing here. I've survived enough dishonesty in my life. I won't accept it from you. She turned to leave. His hand caught her wrist. Not hard. He would never hurt her physically. She knew that with absolute certainty. But firm enough to stop her movement. There is something here, he said roughly. There is something I don't understand and can't control and shouldn't want. But acknowledging it would be dangerous? Catastrophic. For whom? For you. His grip tightened slightly. I am not a man who loves gently, Lucia. I possess. I consume. I destroy what threatens what I claim. If I claimed you, you think I can't survive intensity? I think intensity and I are different species. Then show me. The words escaped before she could stop them. Matteo's expression fractured. For one impossible moment, she saw behind the mask the loneliness, the hunger, the desperate need for something beyond power and control and endless, exhausting vigilance. Then the mask slammed back into place. He released her wrist. Go inside. It's cold. Matteo.
Go.
Inside. She went, but everything had changed. Blood secrets. 2 weeks later. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Lucia found it in her room, slipped beneath her door. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in elegant script she didn't recognize. Inside was a photograph. Two people standing before a building she recognized as the old municipal hall of Palermo. A man in a fine suit. A woman in silk that seemed expensive even in the faded image. The man's face was sharp, aristocratic, cruel around the eyes. The woman's face was... Lucia's breath stopped. The woman's face was her mother's. Younger, cleaner,
Clearly wealthy.
but unmistakably her mother. The same high cheekbones, the same stubborn chin, the same dark eyes that Lucia saw in her own mirror every morning. On the back of the photograph, in the same elegant script, "Some madness is manufactured. Ask the ghost about Maria Vercelli." Lucia's hands began to shake. The investigation begins. She should have gone directly to Matteo. She knew that. But the photograph showed her mother with a man who bore a clear resemblance to the Vercelli family portraits lining the villa's halls. And the note mentioned someone named Maria Vercelli. She needed information before she confronted anyone. Isabella's library contained extensive historical records, family genealogies, business archives, newspaper clippings preserved in leather binders. Lucia waited until her student was occupied with piano practice, then began searching. It took her 3 hours to find a name. Maria Vercelli. Born 1955. Died 1989. She had been Salvatore Vercelli's younger sister, Matteo's aunt. According to the records, Maria had been declared mentally unstable at 21 years old. She had been institutionalized in 1976 at a private facility in Messina. She had escaped in 1982 and disappeared. The file ended there, but Lucia kept looking. In a box of unsorted documents, she found a newspaper clipping from 1983. Homeless couple found living on Via Garibaldi. Authorities baffled by woman's claims of aristocratic birth. The article described two vagrant individuals, a man and a woman, who had appeared on Via Garibaldi claiming they were being persecuted by powerful families. The woman insisted she was Maria Vercelli. The man claimed to be her husband, a former academic named Pietro Belladonna. Authorities had dismissed their claims as delusion. The couple had been left to deteriorate on the streets. They had died of exposure 6 years later. Lucia Belladonna had been born somewhere in between. The confrontation. She found Matteo in his study that evening. He looked up when she entered without knocking, a breach of protocol that immediately signaled something was wrong. Lucia. What? She placed the photograph on his desk. Who sent this to me? He looked at the image. His expression did not change. But she saw his hands go still. Where did you get this? It was slipped under my door, along with a note asking me about Maria Vercelli. She leaned forward. Your aunt. The woman declared insane and institutionalized when she was 21. The woman who escaped and lived as a homeless vagrant on Via Garibaldi until she died of exposure. The woman who, according to everything I've been able to find, was my mother. Silence. Complete, terrible silence. You knew, Lucia breathed. You knew who I was before you hired me. I suspected. Suspected what? That I was the bastard daughter of your crazy aunt? That my entire life of poverty and ostracism was connected to your family? Maria was not crazy. Matteo's voice was flat, controlled, but something burned beneath the surface. She was dangerous. She knew secrets about my father's operations. When she threatened to expose them, he had her declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. Your father destroyed her mind to protect his business? My father destroyed many things to protect his business. It was why I eventually destroyed him. Lucia stepped back. You killed your own father? I ended a dynasty built on cruelty, corruption, and the systematic elimination of anyone who threatened its power. His voice remained calm, but his eyes were burning. My aunt was only one of his victims. My mother was another. Dozens of rivals, informants, innocent bystanders. He left bodies everywhere he walked. And Maria? After she escaped, did you know she was alive?
No.
I was 11 when she was institutionalized. I was 17 when I took power. By then, the institution claimed she had died in the escape attempt. He paused. I believed them. But someone knew the truth. Someone sent me this photograph. Someone is trying to destabilize my operation by revealing uncomfortable connections. Uncomfortable? Lucia's voice rose. Your family destroyed my mother's mind and left her to die on the streets. I grew up in orphanages because your father couldn't tolerate a woman who threatened his secrets. My entire life has been shaped by Vercelli cruelty. I know. The simple admission stopped her. You know. I've known since the background investigation. The resemblance was too strong. The coincidence of your mother's claims and the dates too perfect.
He stood slowly.
I hired you despite your connection to my family. I brought you into my home, knowing what you represented. Why? Because you deserved something from this family, besides destruction. The words hung between them. I was trying to make reparations, Matteo continued quietly, without revealing a truth that would hurt you, without reopening wounds that your mother's death had cauterized. You thought lying to me was kindness? I thought protecting you from painful knowledge was. You thought wrong. Lucia turned toward the door. Where are you going? I don't know, but I can't stay here.
Not now.
Not knowing what I know. Lucia. You've been lying to me since the moment we met. Everything, the job, the kindness, she stopped. Whatever has been developing between us. It was all built on deception. My feelings for you are not deception. She spun back to face him. Your feelings? You think I'm blind to what's happening? His voice roughened. You think I don't notice that you're the first thing I think of when I wake and the last image in my mind before sleep? You think these past months haven't been a slow torture of wanting something I have no right to claim? You have no right to anything from me. Your family destroyed mine. I know. He moved toward her. I know, and I cannot change what my father did. I can only offer what I have now, protection, resources, a future better than the past you survived. And in exchange, what do you expect? Nothing. He stopped, close enough to touch. I expect nothing. I only... He exhaled. Hope. Hope for what? Forgiveness. Eventually. Perhaps something more. But only if you choose it freely. His voice broke slightly on the last words. Matteo Vercelli, the ghost, the most feared man in Sicily, stood before her with vulnerability he had shown no one in decades. And Lucia didn't know whether to embrace him or destroy him. I need time, she said finally. Take whatever you need. I need to leave the villa. Pain flickered across his face. Then acceptance. Marco will arrange secure housing in the city. You'll have protection. I don't want protection. This isn't negotiable. Whoever sent that photograph knows who you are. They're using you as a weapon against me. Until I identify them, you're a target. Then find them. But I can't stay here. I can't look at you and not see. She couldn't finish. He nodded slowly. I understand. She left without another word. Behind her, Matteo Vercelli stood alone in his study, surrounded by the portraits of ancestors who had built an empire on blood. And for the first time since he was 17 years old, he felt something he had forgotten.
Despair.
Chapter 6. Exile. The city apartment. Marco had arranged housing in a secured building near the university. The apartment was small but comfortable. Guards were positioned discreetly throughout the building. Lucia was theoretically free to come and go. But she felt more trapped than she had at the villa. Isabella's visit. 3 days after Lucia's departure, Isabella appeared at her door. You left without saying goodbye, she signed the moment Lucia opened it.
I'm sorry.
I needed to. I know what happened. Father told me everything. Lucia stepped aside to let her enter. You're not angry? At you?
No.
Isabella moved through the small apartment, taking in its modest furnishings. At father? Yes. He should have told you immediately. He thought he was protecting me. He thinks protection justifies everything. It doesn't. Lucia sat heavily on the worn couch. Your great-aunt was my mother. That makes us cousins technically. I know. Isabella sat beside her. Father's already had legal documents prepared. If you want, you can be formally recognized as a Vercelli. You would have access to the family resources. Protection. Everything Maria was denied. I don't want Vercelli money. Then what do you want? Lucia considered the question. I want to understand. Why was Maria really institutionalized? What secrets did she threaten to expose? Why was her madness manufactured? Isabella's hands hesitated. Father hasn't told you everything. What do you mean? The secrets Maria threatened to expose weren't just about business. They were about family. Isabella paused. About Father's mother. About how she really died. The true story. It took Isabella an hour to explain. Elena Vercelli, Matteo's mother, had been murdered by Salvatore when Matteo was 15 years old. Officially, her death was ruled a boating accident. Unofficially, everyone in the family knew the truth. She had discovered Salvatore's role in the disappearance of his own sister, Maria. She had threatened to contact authorities. And Salvatore had silenced her permanently. Maria had not been declared insane because she knew business secrets. She had been institutionalized because she knew Salvatore was planning to kill his wife. She tried to warn my grandmother. Isabella signed. She tried to save her. And for that, my grandfather destroyed her mind with drugs and electroshock therapy, then had her locked away for 6 years. Lucia felt sick. When Maria escaped, she was already damaged beyond repair. Whatever personality she had before the institution was gone. She found the man who became your father, Pietro Belladonna, a former professor who had been fired for defending her publicly, and together they disappeared into the streets. Pietro was real, not just another madman. He was a historian. He'd written articles questioning the Vercelli family's official history. Grandfather had him blacklisted and ruined. He ended up homeless. When Maria escaped, she found him. They married in some back-alley ceremony. And then they descended together. Yes. Lucia closed her eyes. Her parents hadn't been born mad. They had been driven there by the same family whose heir now claimed to love her. The return. She showed up at Villa Vercelli the next morning. Marco seemed surprised but didn't question her. He led her directly to Matteo's study. He was seated behind his desk, signing documents. The sigil tattoo on his hand moved with each signature, serpent-devouring crown, over and over. He looked up when she entered. His eyes widened slightly. You came back. I need you to answer one question honestly. Anything. If you had known about Maria before she died, if you had known she was alive and suffering on Via Garibaldi, would you have saved her? He rose slowly. I was 17 when I discovered what my father had done to my mother. When I learned Maria had been institutionalized to silence her testimony, I spent 6 months planning and 3 minutes executing. His voice was flat, emotionless. My father died believing I was his loyal successor. He never knew I was his executioner. That doesn't answer my question. I would have searched every street in Sicily until I found her. I would have destroyed anyone who had contributed to her suffering. I would have given her everything I had. He moved closer. Maria tried to save my mother. She sacrificed her sanity for a woman she loved like a sister. She deserved better than what she received. She deserved family. Yes. His voice cracked slightly, and instead, she found only cruelty. Lucia studied his face. She saw the guilt there, real, genuine, decades old. She saw the weight of a legacy he had tried to rebuild but could never fully cleanse. She saw a man who had been destroying himself for 30 years trying to atone for sins he hadn't committed. I'm not going to forgive you, she said quietly. Not because you don't deserve forgiveness, but because forgiveness isn't mine to give. You didn't hurt my mother. Your father did. Punishing you for his crimes would make me no better than him. Matteo's breath caught. What are you saying? I'm saying I'll stay. I'll continue teaching Isabella. She hesitated. I'll see what happens. Between us. Without lies. Without lies. Can you do that? Can you be honest with me, even when honesty is uncomfortable? I can try. That's all I'm asking. She turned toward the door. Lucia. She paused. I should have told you immediately. I should have trusted you with the truth instead of deciding what you could handle. He paused. I won't make that mistake again. Good. And Lucia? Yes. I meant what I said. About my feelings. About you being the first thought and the last image. His voice dropped lower. About hope. She didn't respond. But she didn't need to. Her return was response enough. Enemies in the light. 1 week later, the photograph's sender revealed themselves at the worst possible moment. The charity gala. The event was larger than any Lucia had yet attended, a benefit for children's hospitals that brought 500 guests to Palermo's most prestigious venue. Lucia came as Matteo's guest, not as staff, not as Isabella's instructor, as the woman who walked beside the ghost and did not flinch. The whispers were immediate. The Garibaldi girl. The mad couple's daughter. She's risen above her station. He'll tire of her soon enough. Lucia ignored them all. She had survived worse than whispers. Antonio Ricci's return. The Calabrian Don appeared at her elbow during the cocktail hour. Signorina Belladonna. You look radiant. Don Ricci. Her voice was cool. I didn't expect to see you again so soon. Palermo is a small world. Our circles inevitably overlap. He smiled, all teeth, no warmth. Especially now that you've so thoroughly infiltrated the Vercelli inner circle. I work for the family. That's hardly infiltration. Is that what we're calling your relationship with Don Vercelli? Work. Lucia's spine stiffened. I don't know what you're implying. I'm implying nothing. I'm simply observing. His smile sharpened. You've risen remarkably fast for a woman of your origins. One might almost think you had help. Help from whom? From whoever sent you that photograph, perhaps. Lucia's blood went cold. How do you know about? I know many things, Signorina. I know that Maria Vercelli was illegally institutionalized. I know that her escape was facilitated by individuals who wanted to destabilize Salvatore's empire. I know that those same individuals have been watching you for 22 years, waiting for the moment you could be useful. What individuals? Ricci leaned closer. Your mother was never truly mad, Lucia. She was conditioned, broken deliberately, then released into the wild to create chaos. And you, his smile widened. You were the long game. The Vercelli blood nobody expected. The weapon they planted and waited decades to deploy. You're insane. Am I? Ask yourself why you were really hired. Why Matteo Vercelli brought a nobody violinist into his fortress. Why he began watching you like a hawk watches prey. He didn't know who I was. He's the ghost. He knows everything. Ricci stepped back. The question isn't what Matteo knows. It's what he intends to do with you. And whether you'll survive when he decides you've outlived your usefulness. He vanished into the crowd before Lucia could respond. Her hands were shaking. The aftermath. She found Matteo 30 minutes later, holding court with politicians who laughed too loud and agreed too quickly. His eyes found hers across the room. He read her expression instantly. Within moments, he had extracted himself and guided her to a private alcove. What happened? Ricci. He knows about the photograph. He knows about Maria. She lowered her voice. He said my mother was deliberately broken. He said there were individuals who planned this, my birth, my presence here, decades ago. Matteo's expression went completely blank. He's trying to destabilize you. Is he wrong? Silence. Matteo. Is he wrong? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. There are gaps in the records I've never been able to explain. Maria's institutionalization was arranged by my father, but the facility itself, who funded it, who staffed it, those records were destroyed. By whom? I assumed by my father, covering his tracks. But if Ricci is correct... He trailed off. If Ricci is correct, then my entire existence has been orchestrated by people who wanted to destroy your family. Yes. And you brought me into your home, knowing this was a possibility? I brought you into my home because you deserved protection regardless of who you might be connected to. His voice hardened. And because I still believe, that you are not your potential origins. What if I am? What if I was designed specifically to destroy you? Then whoever designed you failed. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. Because you have made me stronger, not weaker. You have given my daughter joy. You have reminded me why I rebuilt this empire in the first place. Matteo. I don't care what Ricci claims. I don't care what plans were made before you were born. I care only about what you choose now. And I choose to trust you. The words struck her like physical blows. Trust. From the ghost. From a man who had built his entire life on suspicion and control. What if I'm not worthy of it? Everyone is worthy of being trusted until they prove otherwise. His thumbs brushed her cheekbones. And you, Lucia Belladonna, have proven yourself every day since you entered my life. She closed her eyes, leaned into his touch, and felt something inside her finally, irrevocably break open. End of Batch 1. Cliffhanger. When Lucia opened her eyes, she saw movement over Matteo's shoulder. A flash of metal. A figure emerging from the shadows. And Antonio Ricci's voice, cold and triumphant. I told you she was a weapon, Vercelli. The question was always, whose weapon? Then the gunshot. Then the screaming. And Lucia watched Matteo crumple before her, blood blooming across his chest, as the truth she had been searching for finally became clear. She wasn't just connected to the conspiracy. She was its trigger. And she had just pulled it. The bleeding ghost. The bullet entered 2 inches below Matteo's left collarbone. It missed his heart by the width of a prayer. Lucia caught him as he fell, or tried to. His weight drove her backward against the alcove wall, and they slid together to the marble floor, her midnight blue gown soaking crimson within seconds. Matteo. His eyes were open, focused. Even wounded, even bleeding, the ghost was calculating. Left exit, he rasped. Marco. Don't talk. Don't. Marco has the exits. He'll. A cough. Blood on his lips. He'll contain it. The ballroom had erupted into chaos. 500 guests scrambling for doors. Security details colliding. Screams echoing off Baroque ceilings that had witnessed centuries of power and violence. But in the alcove, there was only silence. Lucia pressed both hands against the wound. The blood was hot, relentless. It pulsed between her fingers with each heartbeat. Stay with me, she whispered. Don't you dare leave. Bossy, he murmured. Something like a smile touched his lips. You're shot, and you're making jokes? Not a joke. An observation. His hand found hers, the one pressing the wound. His fingers closed around it weakly. You're shaking. Of course I'm shaking. You're bleeding to death. I've survived worse. When? My father shot me when I was 17. Left side. Lower. His breathing grew labored. Family tradition, apparently. Matteo, please. His eyes began to drift closed.
No.
She shook him.
No, no, no.
Open your eyes. Look at me. He obeyed. His gaze locked on hers with tremendous effort. There she is, he whispered. My variable. Then Marco was there, shouting into radios, pressing professional field dressings against the wound. Then paramedics. Then controlled chaos that moved with the precision of an organization accustomed to violence. Lucia was pulled away by security. She fought them. She fought until Isabella appeared, white-faced, terrified, signing so rapidly her hands blurred. What happened? Is he alive? Where is my father? Lucia caught her hands, steadied them. He's alive. He's being treated. The bullet missed his heart. Who did this? Lucia's bloody hands trembled as she signed. Ricci. He said I was a weapon. He said, stop. Isabella's grip tightened. You are not a weapon. Whatever Ricci claims, whatever conspiracy he's manufactured, you didn't pull that trigger. But if I hadn't been here, then father would have attended this gala, anyway. And Ricci would have found another excuse. Isabella's eyes blazed. This isn't about you, Lucia. This is about power. It's always about power. Across Palermo, the Vercelli private medical facility occupied the basement of a building officially registered as a wine storage warehouse. 3 surgeons. State-of-the-art equipment. Complete discretion. Matteo was in surgery for 4 hours. Lucia sat in the sterile waiting room, still wearing her blood-stained gown, refusing every offer to change or clean herself. Isabella sat beside her, equally motionless. They did not sign. They did not need to. At 3:47 a.m., the lead surgeon emerged. The bullet fragmented on impact. We removed all pieces. No major arterial damage. He lost significant blood, but transfusions are stabilizing him. He'll live? Lucia's voice cracked. Don Vercelli is remarkably resilient. He'll need weeks of recovery, but yes, he'll live. Isabella's hand found Lucia's. They held on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. Like family. The bedside vigil. They let her see him at dawn. He was pale. Tubes and monitors surrounded him. The hospital gown revealed the sigil tattoo on his chest, the serpent devouring the crown, rendered in precise black ink over his left pectoral. She sat beside his bed and took his hand. His fingers twitched, then closed around hers. Still here, he murmured without opening his eyes. Where else would I be? Anywhere safe. You're the most dangerous man in Sicily, and you just took a bullet in front of me. Nowhere is safe. She pressed his hand against her cheek. So, I might as well be dangerous too. His eyes opened, heavy-lidded,
Drugged.
but clear. Ricci. Escaped. Marco's people are hunting him. He'll go to ground in Calabria. His network there is. Stop. She leaned closer. Stop strategizing. You almost died. Almost doesn't count. It counts to me. Something shifted in his expression. The drugs were loosening his control, stripping away decades of careful restraint. I heard you, he said softly. When I was falling, you said, don't you dare leave. Like you were commanding the ghost himself. Someone has to. No one ever has. Then it was overdue. His hand tightened on hers. Stay. I told you. I'm not going anywhere.
No.
His voice dropped lower, vulnerable in a way she had never heard. Stay permanently. Not as an employee. Not as Isabella's instructor. Stay as...
He stopped.
The drugs were pulling him under. As what? She whispered. But he was already asleep. And Lucia sat beside the most feared man in Sicily, holding his hand while the sun rose over Palermo, and understood with perfect clarity that she was in love with him.
Completely.
Irrevocably.
Catastrophically.
The proposal of ghosts. 1 week later, Matteo recovered with infuriating speed. By the 3rd day, he was issuing orders from his hospital bed. By the 5th day, he had dismantled 2 of Ricci's subsidiary businesses through phone calls alone. By the 7th day, he insisted on returning to the villa despite medical objections. You were shot, the surgeon protested. The wound requires me to be in my own home, surrounded by my own security, making decisions that cannot be made from a hospital bed. The surgeon looked at Marco for support. Marco shrugged. You've met him. Matteo returned to Villa Vercelli in an armored vehicle, flanked by a convoy that would have suited a head of state. Lucia was waiting at the entrance. She had changed out of the blood-stained gown 3 days prior, but she still hadn't washed the dress. It hung in her closet like evidence. Evidence of the moment everything crystallized. The study that evening. He summoned her at 9 o'clock. She found him in his study, seated in his chair rather than behind his desk, a concession to the wound that clearly irritated him. The sigil tattoo on his wrist was visible as he held a glass of water rather than his usual whiskey. Medical restriction. Another irritation. Close the door, he said. She closed it. Sit. She remained standing. His eyes narrowed slightly. You're being defiant. You just survived a gunshot wound. I think defiance is the least of your problems. My problems are extensive, but none of them matter as much as what I'm about to say. Lucia's heart accelerated. He set down his glass, leaned forward, wincing slightly. Marco's investigation has confirmed that the assassination attempt was orchestrated by a coalition, Ricci's Calabrian syndicate working with elements of the old Vercelli network. Loyalists to my father, who survived the purge. Your father's people are still operating? Not for much longer. His voice carried absolute certainty. But their motivation is relevant. They didn't target me because of business. They targeted me because of you. Because of my connection to Maria. Because of what your connection represents.
He paused.
Maria was Salvatore's sister. If her existence had been publicly acknowledged, if her institutionalization had been exposed, the legitimacy of my father's entire succession would have been questioned. The businesses built on his authority. The alliances formed under his name. But your father is dead. You dismantled his empire. I rebuilt it under different principles. But the legal foundations remain the same. If Maria was illegally silenced, if her bloodline was suppressed through criminal means, then certain property claims, business licenses, and territorial agreements could be challenged in both legal courts and our courts. You mean the other families could use my existence to undermine your authority? Precisely. Lucia sank into the chair she had refused moments ago. So, I am a weapon. You are a person with complicated legal implications. His voice softened. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, my existence threatens your empire. Your existence enriches my life. The legal complications are manageable.
How?
He held her gaze for a long, charged moment. There is a solution that would neutralize the legal threat, protect you from further assassination attempts, and resolve the question of your status within the Vercelli family permanently. What solution? Marriage. The word detonated in the silence. Lucia stared at him. You're proposing. I'm presenting a strategic option that happens to align with my personal desires. That's the most unromantic proposal in human history. I'm not a romantic man. You sent flowers to my room for 6 weeks. You memorized my book preferences. You learned which specific variety of jasmine I mentioned loving as a child and had it planted outside my window. She leaned forward. You're the most romantic man I've ever met. You're just terrified of admitting it. Something cracked in his expression. Fine. His voice roughened. Then I'll admit it. I want to marry you because the thought of you leaving this house, leaving my life, is more terrifying than any bullet. I want to marry you because I am 47 years old and I have never loved anyone the way I love you. I want to marry you because my daughter adores you, my enemies fear you, and my empire means nothing if I have to rule it alone. His breathing was unsteady. The wound was clearly causing pain, but he ignored it. I want to marry you because you are the only person who has ever made me feel like Matteo instead of Il Fantasma. And I would rather die as the man you love than live forever as the ghost everyone fears. Tears streamed down Lucia's face. You're impossible. Is that a yes? It's a, you were shot 8 days ago and you're proposing marriage from a medical chair, while technically still on painkillers. The painkillers expired yesterday. This is fully sober judgment. Matteo. Say yes. He reached for her hand. Say yes, and I will spend whatever years I have left proving that the Vercelli name can mean something other than destruction. She looked at his hand. The sigil tattoo. The serpent devouring the crown. The same symbol her mother had whispered about in the rain-soaked streets of Via Garibaldi. Remember the serpent, Lucia. Perhaps Maria had not been warning her daughter away from this family. Perhaps she had been pointing her toward it. Yes, Lucia whispered. The wedding of serpents and shadows. 3 weeks later. The wedding was deliberately small. Matteo wanted a spectacle, a statement of power that would silence every whisper about the Garibaldi girl's worthiness. But Lucia refused. I don't need 400 strangers watching me promise myself to you. I need your daughter. I need Marco. I need the priest. That's all. He conceded. He could deny her nothing now. The ceremony. The chapel at Villa Vercelli dated to the 16th century. Stone walls. Stained glass depicting saints who had probably never heard of mercy. An altar where generations of Vercelli brides had stood, some willingly, some not. Lucia stood willingly. She wore white, not the elaborate gown Isabella had suggested, but something simple.
Clean.
A deliberate contrast to the darkness of the family she was joining. Matteo stood at the altar in black. His wound still ached. She could see the tension in his shoulder, the slight favor he gave his left side. The sigil tattoo on his neck was visible above his collar. Isabella served as witness. She stood to Lucia's right, crying silently, signing "I love you both" when she thought no one was watching. Marco stood to Matteo's left. His expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. The priest spoke the traditional vows. When Matteo slipped the ring onto Lucia's finger, a band of dark gold engraved with the Vercelli serpent, reimagined as something protective rather than predatory, his hands were steady. When she slipped the matching band onto his, smaller, simpler, chosen by her from a local jeweler rather than the family collection, her hands shook. "You may kiss the bride." He cupped her face in both hands. The sigil tattoos on his wrists framed her jaw like parentheses. He kissed her slowly,
Carefully, as if she were sacred.
as if he could not quite believe she was real. When they parted, his forehead rested against hers. "My wife," he murmured. "My husband." The words felt impossible, and perfect, and doomed, because somewhere beyond the chapel walls, the forces that had manufactured Maria's madness were watching. And they were not finished. The poisoning of paradise. 2 months into the marriage, the first weeks were luminous. Lucia moved into the master suite, Matteo's quarters, which had been solitary for over a decade. She brought her books, her violin, her stubborn independence. He made space for all of it. They developed rhythms. Morning coffee on the terrace, while the sea turned gold. Afternoons with Isabella in the music room. Evenings in the library, reading separately but together, her legs across his lap, his hand absently tracing circles on her ankle while he reviewed documents. Small intimacies. Revolutionary for a man who had forgotten how to be touched. The first night together. Their wedding night was not what Lucia expected. They stood in the master bedroom, ancient, enormous, heavy with the weight of history, and Matteo's composure finally fractured. "I haven't," he stopped. Started again. "It has been a long time since I've been close to anyone." "I know. I don't want to." Another pause. "I don't know how to be gentle anymore. I'm afraid that I've forgotten." She crossed the room to him, took his face in her hands. "Then we'll learn together." She kissed him, and the ghost disappeared. And Matteo, just Matteo, stripped of title and terror and 30 years of armor, held his wife in the darkness and discovered that gentleness had not been forgotten. Only buried. The rest belonged to them alone. The cracks appear. By the second month, the fractures began showing. It started with letters. Anonymous correspondence arriving at the villa despite Marco's security protocols. Each contained fragments of information about Maria, medical records, photographs, testimony from facility staff. Each painted a more horrifying picture of what had been done to Lucia's mother. Electroshock therapy administered, without consent. Chemical sedation lasting months. Psychological manipulation designed not to treat illness, but to create it. Maria Vercelli had entered the institution sane. She had emerged destroyed. And each letter ended with the same phrase. "The serpent devours its own. Ask your husband what he's hiding." The paranoia. Lucia tried to ignore them. She brought the first 3 letters to Matteo. He read them with controlled fury, then handed them to Marco for analysis. "Someone is trying to destabilize our marriage," he said. "Ignore them." "How can I ignore evidence of my mother's torture?" "The evidence is selectively presented, designed to provoke emotional responses rather than reveal truth." "I asked the truth, Matteo. Your father had my mother tortured." "I know. I've never denied that. But you're asking me to move past it. To live in this house, his house, and pretend the walls don't hold that history. I rebuilt this house. I purged it of his influence." "You can't purge blood from stone. You can only paint over it." The argument escalated in ways neither intended. Matteo's control slipped. His voice hardened. He began pacing, a predator caged by his own emotions. "What would you have me do? Burn the villa? Dissolve the family name? Erase 300 years of history because my father was a monster? I would have you acknowledge that bringing me here, marrying me, doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't balance the scales. I never claimed it would. Then what I asked this marriage? Reparations?
Guilt."
The word struck him like a physical blow. "Is that what you believe? That I married you out of guilt?" I don't know what I believe anymore. Silence. Terrible, hollow silence. The letters are designed for exactly this purpose, Matteo said quietly. To make you question my motives. To make you question us. Maybe the letters are right to make me question. He flinched. Actually flinched. She had never seen him react to pain so visibly, not even when he was shot. Lucia. I need space. She moved toward the door. I need to think. Don't shut me out. I'm not shutting you out. I'm trying not to drown. She left. And the distance between them, once measured in inches across library chairs, began measuring in hallways and closed doors and meals taken separately. Isabella's intervention. The daughter saw what the adults refused to acknowledge. She found Lucia in the music room, staring at her violin without playing it. The letters are from Ricci's people, Isabella signed. Marco confirmed it yesterday. They're manufacturing documents, mixing real records with fabricated ones to maximize damage. Some of them are real.
Yes, some are.
And those real horrors deserve acknowledgement. But using them to destroy your marriage is exactly what grandfather's loyalists want. Isabella's hands moved urgently. Don't you see? They couldn't kill father with a bullet. So they're trying to kill him through you. By telling me the truth? By weaponizing the truth. Isabella grabbed Lucia's hands, forcing eye contact. Father loves you. Not out of guilt. Not as reparations. He loves you because you are the first person in his life who saw him as human rather than as a monster or a tool. How do you know?
Because he told me.
The night before your wedding. He sat in my room and told me he was afraid, actually afraid, that he wasn't good enough for you. That his name, his history, his blood made him unworthy of someone who had survived so much. Lucia's eyes filled. He said that? The ghost sat in his daughter's bedroom and admitted fear for the first time in 30 years. And you're going to let anonymous letters from his enemies destroy what that vulnerability created? The tears fell freely now. I don't know how to love someone whose family destroyed mine. His family destroyed mine too, Isabella signed. My grandmother was murdered. My mother was driven away. I grew up in a fortress surrounded by ghosts and secrets and men who would kill on command. But father built something different from those ruins. He's trying, Lucia. He's failing sometimes. He's controlling and obsessive and terrible at communication, but he's trying. What if trying isn't enough? What if it is? The reconciliation. Lucia found him in the olive grove at midnight. He stood among the ancient trees, the moonlight casting silver patterns through the branches. His hands were in his pockets. His shoulders were tense. He looked like a man waiting for a verdict. Matteo. He turned. His expression was guarded. Braced. Expecting the worst. I'm sorry, she said. Surprise flickered across his face. You have nothing to apologize for. I do. I let them inside my head. The letters. The fear. The voices that have been telling me my entire life that I don't deserve good things because of where I came from. She moved closer. But you're not a bad thing, Matteo. You're the best thing that has ever happened to me. And I almost let ghosts from the past steal that. Lucia. I love you. The words came out fierce. Almost angry. I love you, and it terrifies me, because everyone I've ever loved has been taken away or destroyed. My parents. My childhood. Every chance at normalcy. And now I have you, and you're this impossible, dangerous, beautiful man who built an empire on ashes and somehow has the gentlest hands I've ever known. He was in front of her in 2 strides. His arms closed around her, carefully, because his wound still ached, but with an urgency that spoke of desperation long contained. I will spend the rest of my life proving this marriage is not debt or guilt or strategy, he said against her hair. It is the only purely selfish thing I have ever done. Selfish. I married you because I wanted you. Not because you deserved reparations. Not because it solved a political problem. He pulled back to look at her. Because the thought of existing without you made every empire I've built feel meaningless. She kissed him. Under the olive trees where, rumor claimed, 17 men lay buried, Lucia Vercelli kissed her husband and chose love over history. But history was not finished with them yet. The conspiracy revealed. 3 weeks later, Marco burst into Matteo's study without knocking. This had happened exactly twice in 31 years. Both times preceded catastrophe.
We found him, Marco said.
Ricci. He's in Messina. Matteo's eyes sharpened. Messina? At the facility. The same facility where Maria was held. The implication crashed through the room. He's accessing her records. Or destroying them. Our source inside says he's been meeting with a former administrator, a man named Dr. Enzo Calabrese. He ran the facility during Maria's confinement. Calabrese is still alive. 81 years old. Living in a nursing home outside Messina. Until 3 days ago, when Ricci's people removed him. Matteo stood slowly. Ricci isn't trying to destroy the records. He's trying to find something specific. What? The same thing my father wanted suppressed. Matteo's jaw tightened. Maria didn't just know about my mother's murder. She had evidence. Documents, recordings, proof that Salvatore ordered Elena's death. She hid them before she was institutionalized. If Ricci finds that evidence, he'll use it to prove that the entire Vercelli succession was built on illegal foundations. Every contract, every alliance, every territorial agreement, all of it becomes challengeable. And your marriage to Lucia? Matteo went still. What about my marriage? If Maria's suppression is proven in our courts, if the other families accept that a legitimate Vercelli heir was deliberately hidden, then Lucia's claim to the family's assets and authority could supersede yours. Lucia doesn't want authority. It doesn't matter what she wants. It matters what others can use her to claim. Marco's voice was careful.
Precise.
Don Vercelli, if Ricci presents Lucia as the rightful Vercelli heir, descended from Salvatore's sister rather than from the son who murdered him, several families will support her claim over yours. They would use my wife against me. They would use your wife to replace you. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Matteo reached for his phone. Prepare the Messina team. We leave tonight. That evening, Lucia found the study empty. A note on the desk in Matteo's precise handwriting. Business in Messina. 2 days. Marco is with me. Stay with Isabella. Stay inside the walls. I love you.
M.
She stared at the note. Then she called Marco's private number. No answer. She called Matteo's. No answer. She went to Isabella. Did your father tell you where he's going? Isabella's expression was troubled. Messina. He said something about the facility where Maria was held. He went without telling me. He went to protect you. He always leaves to protect people. It's his worst habit. What if protection isn't what this needs? What if this needs truth? Isabella studied her cousin's face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that my mother hid something in that facility 30 years ago. Something powerful enough that men are still fighting over it. And I'm thinking that whatever it is, it belongs to me, not to Matteo, not to Ricci, not to any of them. Lucia, you can't go to Messina alone. I'm not going alone. I'm taking you. Isabella's eyes widened. Father will kill us both. Your father is trying to fight a war over my inheritance, without consulting me. That ends now. A slow smile crossed Isabella's face. When do we leave? The facility. Messina, the next morning. The former psychiatric facility sat on a cliff overlooking the Strait of Messina. Abandoned for 15 years, it still radiated malevolence. Barred windows. Walls stained with weather and neglect. Iron gates rusted open like broken jaws. Lucia stood before it and felt her blood turn cold. Her mother had been imprisoned here, tortured here, broken here. Isabella touched her arm. We don't have to go in. Yes, we do. They entered together. 2 Vercelli women returning to the site of the family's greatest crime. The search. The interior was gutted. Furniture removed. Equipment stripped. But the architecture remained. Long corridors with cells on either side. Treatment rooms with drain channels in the floors. A chapel with broken pews where patients had been brought to pray for healing that the staff actively prevented. Lucia moved through the corridors with eerie certainty, as if some cellular memory was guiding her. She stopped before a cell on the 3rd floor. This was hers. How do you know? I don't know how I know. But I'm certain. The cell was bare. Concrete walls. A single barred window overlooking the sea. A metal bracket where a bed frame had once been bolted. Lucia ran her hands along the walls. In the corner, near the floor, she found scratches in the concrete. Letters. Carved painstakingly with what must have been a stolen utensil. LB, find the serpent's heart.
LB.
Lucia Belladonna. Her mother had carved a message for a daughter who hadn't even been conceived yet. Or had she? Lucia's mind raced. The timeline. Maria was institutionalized in 1976. She escaped in 1982. Lucia was born in approximately 1983. But these scratches, the depth of the grooves, the precision of the letters, suggested clarity. Planning. A woman who knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't mad when she carved this, Lucia signed to Isabella. She was thinking clearly. Planning. Planning what? An escape. And a legacy. Lucia's hands traced the words again. Find the serpent's heart. The Vercelli sigil is a serpent. If the serpent has a heart. She looked at the sigil tattooed on the wall of the cell. Someone, perhaps Maria herself, had scratched the Vercelli emblem into the concrete beside her message. But this version was different. The serpent was not devouring a crown. It was wrapped around a small rectangle. A box. She hid something, Lucia signed. Something inside the family's symbol itself.
But where?
Lucia stared at the scratched image. The serpent's body curved in a specific pattern, one she had seen before. At the villa. In the chapel. Carved into the altar itself. The chapel at Villa Vercelli. She breathed aloud. She hid it in the altar. The collision in Messina. They emerged from the facility to find Matteo's convoy blocking the access road. He stood beside the lead vehicle, arms crossed, expression thunderous. The sigil tattoo on his hand seemed to burn as his fists clenched. Get in the car, he said. His voice was ice. Matteo. Both of you. In the car.
Now.
Isabella stepped forward defiantly. We found something. I don't care what you found. You left the villa without protection. You drove 3 hours through territory Ricci controls. You entered a building that could have been rigged, monitored, or occupied by hostile elements. His voice remained dangerously soft.
Get in the car.
Lucia stepped between father and daughter. We found Maria's message. She carved it into her cell wall. She left instructions for me, specifically for me, 30 years before I was born. Matteo's fury wavered. What instructions? She hid something. Evidence, whatever your father was so desperate to suppress. She hid it inside the Vercelli chapel altar before she was institutionalized. Silence. The chapel, Matteo repeated. The chapel where we were married. Yes. The irony was not lost on anyone. You're certain? I'm certain. He looked at his daughter. At his wife. 2 women who had defied his orders, risked their lives, and uncovered what his entire intelligence network had missed. His anger dissolved into something that looked suspiciously like pride. We go home, he said. Together. Now. The serpent's heart. Villa Vercelli. That night, the chapel was lit by candles. Matteo had ordered the staff away. Only 4 people stood before the ancient altar. Matteo, Lucia, Isabella, and Marco. The altar was carved from a single block of Sicilian marble. 400 years old. The front panel depicted the Vercelli serpent in elaborate relief, the creature's body winding around symbols of power, faith, and family. And at its center, the serpent's coils formed a specific pattern. A compartment. I've attended services in this chapel since childhood, Matteo said quietly. I never noticed. You weren't looking for it, Lucia replied. I was. She placed her hands on the serpent's carved body, felt along the curves of stone, found a subtle seam where the marble met itself, nearly invisible, designed to be found only by someone who knew exactly what to search for. She pressed. A soft click. A panel shifted inward. Behind it was a space no larger than a shoebox. Inside that space was a leather portfolio, sealed with wax. Maria's evidence. The revelation. They opened it in the study. The portfolio contained 3 items. First, a series of audio recordings, cassette tapes, carefully labeled in Maria's handwriting. Dates corresponding to conversations between Salvatore Vercelli and various associates, including explicit discussion of Elena's planned murder. Second, a set of financial documents tracing payments from Salvatore to the psychiatric facility, payments that specified behavioral modification protocols that amounted to psychological torture. Third, a letter, addressed to Lucia, written in Maria's hand, clear, precise, devastatingly sane. My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, then I have succeeded in my only remaining purpose. You exist. You survive. And you have found your way home. I write this in clarity that will not last. They give me chemicals that steal my thoughts. Each treatment takes more. Soon I will have nothing left but the animal instinct to escape and the bone-deep knowledge that I must find Pietro and create you. You are not an accident, Lucia. You are deliberate. You are my answer to your grandfather's empire of cruelty. You carry Vercelli blood, but you carry something he could never possess. Innocence uncorrupted by power. I hid this evidence because I knew Salvatore would destroy it if found. But I also knew that someday someone would need it. Not to destroy the family, but to cleanse it. If you are reading this, you have found your way into the serpent's heart.
And you have survived.
I loved you before you existed. I was sane long enough to ensure your creation. And if madness took me afterward, if the woman you remember was broken and lost, know that she was once strong enough to defy an empire for your sake. You were never cursed, my darling. You were always the cure. With all the love I could not show you. Maria Vercelli Belladonna. The aftermath. Lucia read the letter 3 times. Then she wept. Not the quiet tears of their reconciliation in the olive grove. These were the deep, racking sobs of a woman whose entire identity had just been rewritten. She was not the accidental offspring of 2 mad souls on Via Garibaldi. She was the deliberate creation of a brilliant, brave woman who had sacrificed her own sanity to bring a child into the world who could someday set things right. Matteo held her. He said nothing. There were no words adequate to this revelation. He simply held his wife in his arms and let her grieve for the mother she had never truly known. Isabella stood at the study window, reading Maria's letter through her own tears. She was a hero. She signed to no one in particular. Our aunt was a hero. Marco, standing by the door, wiped his eyes with military precision and pretended he had not. The reckoning. Days later. The evidence changed everything. Matteo convened a meeting of the major Sicilian families, the first such gathering in 7 years. It was held at a neutral location in Catania, attended by representatives of every significant organization on the island, including Antonio Ricci, who arrived flanked by bodyguards and bravado, convinced his plan was succeeding. The tribunal. 12 family heads sat around a circular table. Matteo entered last, a strategic choice. The ghost always arrived after everyone was already uncomfortable. Lucia entered with him. The whispers were immediate. The Garibaldi girl. At a family meeting? He's lost his mind. Matteo waited for silence. It came quickly. You've been summoned because the foundation of Vercelli authority has been questioned, he began. Don Ricci has circulated claims that my succession was illegitimate, that my father's crimes against his own sister created a suppressed bloodline with superior claim to Vercelli assets and territories. Ricci leaned back, smiling. I've done nothing but reveal truth, Don Vercelli. Truth. Matteo produced Maria's portfolio. Let's discuss truth. He played the recordings. Salvatore Vercelli's voice filled the room. Cold, casual, discussing the murder of his own wife, as if arranging a business lunch. The family heads listened in absolute silence. These recordings prove what many suspected, Matteo continued. My father was a murderer who silenced witnesses through institutional torture. His empire was built on cruelty that violated every code our organizations claim to uphold.
He paused.
But the recordings also prove something else. He looked at Ricci. They prove that the facility where Maria Vercelli was tortured received funding not only from my father, but from an external source. a source that had its own reasons for wanting the Vercelli family destabilized. Ricci's smile faded. Matteo produced the financial documents. Payments to the Calabrese facility from a shell company registered in Calabria. A company whose beneficial ownership. He laid a document on the table. Traces directly to the Ricci family. The room went still. Your father, Matteo said, looking directly at Ricci, helped mine torture my aunt. Not to protect Vercelli interests but to weaken them. The plan was simple. Destabilize the succession, create legal chaos, and position the Calabrian syndicate to absorb Vercelli territories when the empire collapsed. Ricci's face had gone white. That plan continued through your generation, Matteo continued. The anonymous letters to my wife. The assassination attempt. The manufactured documents mixing truth with fabrication. All designed to either destroy my marriage or turn Lucia against me, making her a puppet claimant you could control. This is speculation. This is evidence. Matteo's voice went quiet.
Deadly.
Corroborated by Dr. Calabrese himself, who has provided a full statement to our mediators in exchange for protection from your retribution. Ricci stood abruptly. His bodyguards reached for weapons. 12 family heads watched without moving. Sit down, Antonio, said Don Ferrante from the Trapani family. His voice was weary. Ancient. You've been outmaneuvered. Accept it with whatever dignity you have left. Ricci's gaze swept the table. He found no allies. The evidence was irrefutable. The recordings were genuine. The financial trail was clear. And Ricci's attempt to destabilize the Vercelli succession had been exposed as not righteous advocacy for a wronged bloodline but cynical manipulation designed to expand Calabrian power. The council will address the Calabrian question, Matteo said, returning to his seat. But first, the matter of succession. He turned to Lucia. She stepped forward. Every eye in the room fixed on her. The cursed daughter of Via Garibaldi. The woman born of manufactured madness. The violinist who had entered the ghost's world and refused to be consumed by it. My name is Lucia Belladonna Vercelli, she said.
Her voice was steady, clear.
I am the daughter of Maria Vercelli and Pietro Belladonna. I carry Vercelli blood. By the traditions of this council, I have a legitimate claim to my family's assets and authority. Murmurs. But I am not here to claim power. I am not a weapon to be deployed against my husband, my cousin, or anyone else at this table. She placed Maria's letter on the table. My mother sacrificed everything to give me life. She endured torture, madness, and death on the streets of Palermo so that I could exist. She did not create me to perpetuate cycles of violence and power. She created me to end them. She looked at Matteo. I formally waive any competing claim to Vercelli authority. My husband's succession stands unchallenged. And I ask this council to recognize that the crimes committed against Maria Vercelli were not the actions of the current Vercelli leadership, but of a regime that was dismantled 30 years ago by the very man who now heads this family. Silence. Then Don Ferrante nodded slowly. The council recognizes Lucia Vercelli's statement. The succession stands. One by one, the family heads voiced agreement. Ricci said nothing. His silence was its own verdict. After the meeting, Matteo found her in the corridor. She was leaning against a wall, trembling with the aftermath of adrenaline. You didn't need to waive your claim, he said quietly. You had every right. I didn't want rights. I wanted peace. You may have just saved my empire. I didn't do it for your empire. She looked at him. I did it because my mother wanted the cycle of destruction to end. And the only way it ends is if someone chooses to stop fighting. He took her hand. The sigil tattoo on his wrist pressed against her pulse. You are extraordinary, he said. I'm tired. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She almost laughed. Take me home, Matteo. Always. Reckoning's aftermath. 1 week later, Ricci's network collapsed within days. The council's judgment was swift. Territorial sanctions, financial penalties, and a formal censure that effectively reduced the Calabrian syndicate to a regional footnote. Ricci himself disappeared. Not through Matteo's intervention. The ghost had, in a break from historical precedent, argued for exile rather than elimination. He's defeated, Matteo told Marco. Dead men become martyrs. Living failures become warnings. You're showing mercy. I'm showing strategy. You're showing mercy because your wife asked you to. Matteo did not deny it. The healing, the villa changed. Not physically. The stone walls remained. The gardens continued their eternal bloom. The olive grove kept its secrets. But the atmosphere shifted. Lucia began playing violin in the evenings. The music drifted through corridors that had known only silence and whispered threats. Staff paused in their duties to listen. Guards at the perimeter tilted their heads toward the melody. Isabella composed her first original piece, a piano sonata she titled Via Garibaldi. She performed it for Lucia in the music room while Matteo watched from the doorway. The piece was haunting, complex, built on dissonance that resolved into unexpected beauty. Like their family. The portrait. Matteo commissioned a portrait of Maria Vercelli, based on the photograph Ricci had originally sent. Combined with Lucia's memories and institutional records, an artist reconstructed Maria as she had been before the facility. Young, sharp-eyed, defiant. He hung it in the main hall beside the other Vercelli portraits. Lucia found it on a Tuesday morning. She stood before it for 20 minutes, tears streaming silently. Matteo appeared behind her. His hand found the small of her back, the same gesture from the gala, months ago. A lifetime ago. She belongs here, he said. Thank you. Don't thank me. It's 30 years overdue. Lucia leaned into him. He absorbed her weight, without effort. I wish she could have seen this. Perhaps she can. He did not elaborate. But Lucia noticed that fresh flowers appeared beneath Maria's portrait every morning. She never discovered who placed them. She suspected the ghost himself. New life. 3 months later, Lucia felt the change before she understood it. Fatigue that lingered past morning coffee. Sensitivity to scents that had never bothered her. A tenderness in her body that felt like transformation rather than illness. She knew. Before the test confirmed it, she knew. The telling. She found Matteo in the olive grove at dusk, his favorite hour, when the light turned the world amber and the sea whispered promises. He was reading. His glasses, which he wore only in private, an admission of human limitation that he treated as classified information, perched on his nose. The sigil tattoo on his wrist was visible as he turned a page. He looked up when she approached. Read her expression instantly. The book fell from his hands. Lucia? I'm pregnant. The words hung in the evening air like cathedral bells. Matteo stood. His mouth opened.
Closed.
Opened again. No sound emerged. For the first time in recorded history, the ghost was speechless. Matteo! He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, fell to his knees before her, pressed his forehead against her stomach. His hands that had signed death warrants, held weapons, built empires, trembled against her hips. A child, he whispered. Our child. I'm 47 years old. I'm aware of your age. I'm a dangerous man with enemies and a legacy of blood. Also aware. I don't know how to be a good father. You raised Isabella alone after her mother left. You learned sign language at 17. You rebuilt a criminal empire so your daughter could grow up in something better than what you inherited. She placed her hands on his head. You already know how to be a good father. You've been practicing for 23 years. He looked up at her, and she saw it. The thing the ghost kept hidden from everyone, buried beneath layers of control and power and carefully maintained terror.
Joy.
Pure, overwhelming, terrified joy. I love you, he said. I love you, and I don't deserve you, and I will spend every remaining day of my life ensuring that this child, our child, grows up knowing that love is stronger than blood. Lucia sank to her knees in front of him. Eye level.
Equal.
No more kneeling,
she said gently.
We face everything standing. He almost laughed. Then he kissed her. In the olive grove where 17 men reportedly lay buried, where violence and death and the weight of Sicilian history pressed against the roots of ancient trees, Matteo and Lucia Vercelli knelt together and felt the first stirrings of a future that owed nothing to the past. Isabella's reaction. I'm going to be a cousin UNT, Isabella signed with such enthusiasm that she nearly knocked over a lamp. Technically just a cousin, Lucia corrected. I don't care about technicalities. I'm going to be the best cousin aunt in Sicilian history. She threw her arms around Lucia, then immediately pulled back.
Sorry.
Too tight? I don't want to. I'm pregnant, not fragile. Father is going to be insufferable about security now. You know that, right? He'll probably assign bodyguards to the baby before it's born. He's already discussed prenatal security protocols with Marco.
Of course he has.
They laughed together. Two Vercelli women, one born into the name and one born from its darkest secret, both choosing to fill the villa's corridors with something other than silence. The vow renewed. 7 months later, the pregnancy progressed without complications. Lucia played violin until her 8th month, when the physical demands of performance exceeded her energy. She switched to teaching Isabella full-time, and together they developed a method of musical composition that incorporated vibration patterns Isabella could feel. A music publisher expressed interest. Isabella's compositions began reaching audiences beyond the villa walls. The deaf daughter of the ghost, creating music that moved hearing audiences to tears. Matteo's pride was quiet but absolute. The final threat, it came in the form of a letter. Not anonymous this time. Signed by Ricci. Don Vercelli. I congratulate you on your expanding family. I hope your wife and unborn child enjoy the protection your empire provides. But empires fall. All of them. Eventually. And when yours does, I will be waiting.
AR.
Matteo read the letter in his study. Then he burned it. Then he called Marco. Find him. Don Vercelli said exile. That was before he threatened my pregnant wife. Matteo's voice was something Lucia had never heard. Not cold, not controlled, but burning. Absolute. Find him. End this. How would you like it handled? Like a ghost handles everything. Matteo's eyes were dark.
Silently. Permanently.
Without a trace. Marco nodded. Ricci was found 3 weeks later in a small town outside Cosenza. He was not harmed. He was presented with evidence, comprehensive, irrefutable, of every crime he had committed, every tax he had evaded, every politician he had bribed. The evidence was delivered simultaneously to law enforcement agencies in 3 countries. Ricci was arrested by Italian federal police the following morning. He would spend the remainder of his life in prison. No violence. No disappearance. Just the systematic, meticulous destruction of an enemy through legal means. Lucia's influence. The ghost adapting. The birth. Marco Alessandro Vercelli was born on a rainy Tuesday in April. In Palermo. On Via Garibaldi. Not on the street. In the private wing of a hospital whose construction Matteo had personally funded, located 3 blocks from the cobblestones where Maria had once wandered in manufactured madness. The location was Lucia's choice. My mother brought me into this world on Via Garibaldi because she had no other option, she told Matteo. I want to bring our son into this world on Via Garibaldi because I choose it. Because the street that symbolized my shame will become the street that symbolizes our beginning. He could deny her nothing. He had never been able to deny her anything. The first moment, the baby was small, dark-haired. He had Lucia's chin and Matteo's eyes, nearly black, already observant. Matteo held his son for the first time with hands that visibly shook. The sigil tattoo on his wrist pressed against the infant's blanket. Serpent and crown. Blood and legacy. But something had changed in the symbol's meaning. It no longer represented power devouring innocence. Now it represented protection encircling vulnerability. Marco, Matteo murmured, testing the name. After the man who kept me alive long enough to find you. In the corridor, Marco Ferrante, consigliere, soldier, 31 years of loyal service, leaned against the wall and wept without sound. The vow. That evening, after the doctors had departed and Isabella had reluctantly been persuaded to stop hovering and get some sleep, Matteo sat beside Lucia's bed in the dim hospital room. She was exhausted. Luminous. Their son slept in the bassinet between them. I need to tell you something, Matteo said. If it's another security protocol for the baby, I swear. It's not. He took her hand. It's a promise. She waited. I was raised to believe that love was weakness. That trust destroyed. That control was the only defense against a world designed to annihilate anything soft. He paused. You've proven every one of those beliefs wrong. Matteo. I'm not finished. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressed them against her knuckles. I vow to you, to our son, to Isabella, to the memory of Maria, that this family will not repeat its history. The violence I was born into ends with me. The secrets, the betrayals, the manufactured madness, all of it ends. You can't guarantee that.
No.
But I can choose it. Every day. And I will. She reached up and touched his face, the sharp angles softened by years of learning to be human again. You already have, she whispered. Outside, rain fell on Via Garibaldi. The same rain that had once witnessed madness and despair now washed the streets clean. And in a hospital room overlooking those ancient cobblestones, a family born from conspiracy and cruelty and impossible love began writing a new story. One that had nothing to do with ghosts, and everything to do with grace. The Woman of Via Garibaldi. 1 year later, the bookshop on Via Garibaldi had been renovated. Not destroyed and rebuilt, Lucia had insisted on preservation. The original structure remained, with its worn wooden floors and narrow staircase and the tiny apartment above where she had once lived in solitude. But now it housed something new. The Maria Vercelli Foundation for Arts Education provided free music instruction to children throughout Palermo, regardless of background, ability, or origin. Deaf students were welcomed alongside hearing ones. Children from Via Garibaldi sat beside children from the Hill Estates. Isabella directed the program. Lucia taught violin on Saturdays. And once a month, Don Matteo Vercelli, Il Fantasma, the ghost, the most feared man in Sicily, sat in a tiny folding chair in the back row of the performance hall and watched children play music his aunt had been tortured for loving. He never spoke during these performances. He never needed to. His presence said everything. The final image, the portrait of Maria Vercelli, hung in the foundation's entrance hall. Beneath it, fresh flowers appeared every morning. Everyone assumed it was the staff. But Lucia knew. She had followed him once, watched her husband cross the pre-dawn streets of Palermo alone, without guards, without armor, carrying a bundle of jasmine to the woman who had sacrificed everything so that love could survive the serpent's embrace. He never knew she watched. Or perhaps he did. The ghost always knew. But some secrets were worth keeping. The very last moment, on a warm evening in June, Lucia sat on the villa terrace with baby Marco in her lap. Isabella played piano inside, something new, something bright, something that made the windows vibrate with joy. Matteo appeared behind her. His hand rested on her shoulder. The sigil tattoo on his wrist caught the dying sunlight. She placed her hand over his. Below them, the Mediterranean stretched toward infinity, ancient, patient, indifferent to the empires that rose and fell along its shores. But within the walls of Villa Vercelli, something existed that empires could not create and violence could not destroy. A family, imperfect,
Scarred.
built on the ruins of cruelty and the stubborn insistence that love was worth the risk. Happy? Matteo asked. Terrified, Lucia admitted. Grateful.
Exhausted.
Happy. All of those at once? Always. He kissed the top of her head. The ghost, haunting nothing now except the edges of his wife's smile. The cursed daughter of Via Garibaldi, proving that no birth is an omen and no bloodline is a prison. And between them, a child who would grow up knowing that the serpent on his father's wrist was not a symbol of power-devouring innocence. It was a symbol of love protecting everything worth keeping.